The Book of Enoch, translated by Robert Henry Charles. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 1. Editor's Preface. The object of this series of translations is primarily to furnish students with short, cheap, and handy textbooks, which it is hoped will facilitate the study of the particular texts in class under competent teachers. But it is also hoped that the volumes will be acceptable to the general reader who may be interested in the subjects with which they deal. It has been thought advisable as a general rule to restrict the notes and comments to a small compass, more especially as, in most cases, excellent works of a more elaborate character are available. Indeed, it is much to be desired that these translations may have the effect of inducing readers to study the larger works. Our principal aim, in a word, is to make some difficult texts, important for the study of Christian origins, more generally accessible in faithful and scholarly translations. In most cases, these texts are not available in a cheap and handy form. In one or two cases, texts have been included of books which are available in the official Apocrypha. But in every such case, reasons exist for putting forth these texts in a new translation, with an introduction in this series. W. O. E. Osterley, G. H. Box. Introduction. The Apocalyptic Literature. As the Book of Enoch is, in some respects, the most notable extant apocalyptic work outside the canonical scriptures, it will not be inappropriate to offer a few remarks here on the apocalyptic literature generally. In writing about the books which belong to this literature, Professor Burkett says very pointedly that they are the most characteristic survival of what I will venture to call, with all its narrowness and its incoherence, the heroic age of Jewish history. The age when the nation attempted to realize in action the part of the peculiar people of God. It ended in catastrophe, but the nation left two successors, the Christian Church and the rabbinical schools, each of which carried on some of the old national aims. And of the two, it was the Christian Church that was most faithful to the ideas enshrined in the Apocalypses, and it did consider itself, not without some reason, the fulfillment of those ideas. What is wanted, therefore, in studying the Apocalypses is, above all, sympathy with the ideas that underlie them, and especially with the belief in the new age. And those who believe that in Christianity a new era really did dawn for us ought, I think, to have that sympathy. We study the Apocalypses to learn how our spiritual ancestors hoped again that God would make all right in the end. And that we, their children, are here today studying them is an indication that their hope was not wholly unfounded. Hope is, indeed, the main underlying motive power which prompted the writers of the Apocalypses, and this hope is the more intensive and ardent in that it shines forth from a background which is dark with despair. For the Apocalyptists despaired of the world in which they lived, a world in which the godly were of no account, while the wicked seemed too often triumphant and prosperous. With evil everywhere around, the Apocalyptists saw no hope for the world as it was. For such a world there was no remedy, only destruction. If the good were ever to triumph, it must be in a new world. Despairing, therefore, of the world around them, the Apocalyptists centered their hope upon a world to come, where the righteous would come to their own, and evil would find no place. It is this thought which underlies the opening words of the Book of Enoch. The words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. Nowhere in this book is the essence of this hope more beautifully expressed than in a short metrical piece in the first chapter. But with the righteous he will make peace, and will protect the elect, and mercy shall be upon them. And they shall all belong to God, and they shall all be prospered, and they shall all be blessed. And he will help them all, and light shall appear unto them, and he will make peace with them. 1 Enoch 1:8. In all the books belonging to this literature which have come down to us, this hope is expressed more or less vividly, nor is the dark background wanting with prophecies of coming wrath. It will therefore be realized that the apocalyptic literature is almost wholly concerned with the future. It is true that again and again the apocalyptist glances at the contemporary history of the world around him, to which many a cryptic reference is made, a fact which necessitates some knowledge of the history of this period, circa 200 BC through AD 100, for a full understanding of the books in question. But these references are only made with a view to comforting the oppressed and afflicted with the thought that even the most mighty of earthly powers are shortly to be overthrown by the advent of the new and glorious era, when every injustice and all the incongruities of life will be done away with, so that every reference to the present is merely a position taken up from which to point to the future. Now, since, as we have seen, the apocalyptists despair of any bettering of the present world, and therefore contemplate its destruction as the preliminary of the new order of things, they look away from this world in their visions of the future. They conceive of other worldly forces coming into play in the reconstitution of things, and of society generally. And since these are other worldly forces, the supernatural plays a great part in the apocalyptic literature. This supernatural coloring will often strike the reader of this literature as fantastic, and at times bizarre. But this should not be permitted to obscure the reality which often lies behind these weird shadows. Mental visions are not always easily expressed in words. The seer who in a vision has received a message in some fantastic guise necessarily has the impress upon his mind of what he has seen when giving his message. And when he describes his vision, the picture he presents is, in the nature of the case, more fantastic to the ear of the hearer than to the eye of him who saw it. Allowance should be made for this, especially by us Westerns, who are so lacking in the rich imaginativeness of the Oriental. Our love of literalness hinders the play of the imagination because we are so apt to materialize a mental picture presented by another. The apocalypses were written by and for Orientals, and we cannot do justice to them unless we remember this. But it would be best if we could get into the Oriental mind and look at things from that point of view. Another thing which the reader of the apocalyptic literature must be prepared for is the frequent inconsistency of thought to be found there, together with variableness of teaching often involving contradiction. The reason of this is not to be sought simply in the fact that in the apocalypses the hand of more than one author is frequently to be discerned, a fact which would easily account for divergence of views in one and the same book. No, the chief reason is that, on the one hand, the minds of the apocalyptists were saturated with the traditional thoughts and ideas of the Old Testament, and, on the other, they were eagerly absorbing the newer conceptions which the spirit of the age had brought into being. This occasioned a continual conflict of thought in their minds. The endeavor to harmonize the old and the new would not always succeed, and in consequence there often resulted a compromise which was illogical and which presented contradictions. Inconsistency of teaching on certain points is therefore not surprising under the circumstances. Again, to realize the significance of much that is found in these apocalypses, one has to reckon with a rigid predestinarianism which was characteristic of the apocalyptists as a whole. They started with the absolute conviction that the whole course of the world from beginning to end, both as regards to its physical changes and also in all that concerns the history of nations, their growth and decline, and of every single individual, was in every respect predetermined by God Almighty before all time. This belief of the apocalyptists is well illustrated in one of the later apocalypses by these words: "For he hath weighed the age in the balance, and by number hath he numbered the seasons. Neither will he move nor stir things, till the measure appointed be fulfilled." 2 Esdras 4:36-37. Thus, the times and periods of the course of the world's history have been predetermined by God. The numbers of the years have been exactly fixed. This was a fundamental postulate of the apocalyptists, who devoted much of their energy to calculations, based upon a close study of prophecy, as to the exact period when history should reach its consummation. The underlying idea is predestinarian. But all these things, according to the apocalyptists, were divine secrets hidden from the beginning of the world, but revealed to God-fearing men to whom was accorded the faculty of peering into the hidden things of God and of understanding them. Upon these men was laid the privilege and duty of revealing the divine secrets to others, hence their name of apocalyptists or revealers. It was because the apocalyptists believed so firmly in this power which they possessed of looking into the deep things of God that they claimed to be able to measure the significance of what had happened in the past and of what was happening in the present. And upon the basis of this knowledge they believed that they also had the power, given them by God, of foreseeing the march of future events, above all, of knowing when the end of the world would come, a consummation towards which the whole history of the world had been tending from the beginning. In spite of all the mysticism, sometimes of a rather fantastic kind, and of frequently supramundane vision with which the apocalyptic literature abounds, the apocalyptists fully realized the need of practical religion. They were upholders of the law, the loyal observance of which they regard as a necessity for all God-fearing men. In this, the apocalyptists were at one in principle with Pharisaism. But their conception of what constituted loyal observance of the law differed from that of the Pharisees. For unlike these, the apocalyptists laid all stress on the spirit of its observance rather than upon the letter. Characteristic of their attitude here are the words in 1 Enoch chapter 5, verse 4. But ye have not been steadfast nor done the commandments of the Lord, but ye have turned away and have spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. O ye hard-hearted, ye shall find no peace. And again in 99:2, woe to them that pervert the words of uprightness and transgress the eternal law. We do not find in this literature that insistence on the literal carrying out of the minutest precepts of the law which was characteristic of Pharisaism. Veneration for the law is wholehearted. It is the real guide of life. Punishment awaits those who ignore its guidance. But the Pharisaic interpretation of the law and its requirements is alien to the spirit of the apocalyptists. As a whole, the apocalyptic literature presents an universalistic attitude very different from the nationalistic narrowness of the Pharisees. It is true, the apocalyptists are not always consistent in this, but normally they embrace the Gentiles equally with the men of their own nation in the divine scheme of salvation. And in the same way, the wicked who are excluded are not restricted to the Gentiles, but the Jews equally with them shall suffer torment hereafter according to their deserts. The apocalyptic literature, as distinct from the apocalyptic movement owing to which it took its rise, began to come into existence about the period of 200 to 150 BC. At any rate, the earliest extant example of this literature, the earliest portions of the Book of Enoch, belongs to this period. Works of an apocalyptic character continued to be written for about 3 centuries. The second, fourth book of Esdras, one of the most remarkable apocalypses, belongs to the end of the first Christian century, approximately. There are apocalypses of later date. Some of subordinate interests are of much later date. But the real period of the apocalyptic literature is from about 200 BC to about AD 100. Its beginnings date therefore from a time prior to that great landmark in Jewish history, the Maccabean era. The Book of Enoch, its component parts, and their dates. The Book of Enoch is now usually designated First Enoch to distinguish it from the later apocalypse, The Secrets of Enoch, known as Second Enoch. The former is also called the Ethiopic Enoch, the latter the Slavonic Enoch, after the languages of the earliest versions extant of each respectively. No manuscript of the original language of either is known to be in existence. According to Canon Charles, the various elements of which our book in its present form is made up belong to different dates. The following table will show the dates of the different parts of the book. Canon Charles believes that these are approximately correct, without committing himself to the certainty of this in each case. Chapters 12 through 36, 42, and 91, 12 through 17. The Apocalypse of Weeks, the oldest pre-Maccabean portions. Chapters 6 through 11, 54:7 through 55:2, 60, 65 through 69:25, 106 through 107. Fragments of the Book of Noah, pre-Maccabean at the latest. Chapters 83 to 90, the dream-visions, 165 to 161 BC. Chapters 72 to 82, the Book of the Heavenly Luminaries, before 110 BC. Chapters 37 to 71, 91, 1 to 11, 18, 19 through 104. The parables or similitudes, circa 105 to 64 BC. Chapters 1 through 5, the latest portion, but pre-Christian. Chapter 105, which consists of only 2 verses, cannot be dated, while chapter 108 is in the nature of an appendix, probably added subsequently to the whole work. While these dates may be regarded as approximately correct, it should be pointed out that differences of opinion